I was found unconscious on my kitchen floor. The hospital called my daughter, who replied, "It's my weekend away." When she came, her face went pale and a scream tore from her throat because I wasn't alone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The wilted daisies on my nightstand had been white once. Now they drooped like forgotten promises, their petals brown at the edges, curling inward as if trying to protect themselves from disappointment. I touched one gently, watching it crumble between my fingers. How fitting. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and other people's grief, but I had grown used to it over the past week. 7 days of staring at these beige walls. 7 days of waiting for a familiar face that never came. The nurses were kind enough. Dora, the young one with freckles, had brought me these flowers from the hospital garden on Tuesday. "Every room needs something alive," she'd said, not knowing how ironic her words would prove to be. My reflection in the bathroom mirror this morning had shown me a stranger. At 68, I'd always prided myself on maintaining some dignity in my appearance, but a week of hospital gowns and sleepless nights had stripped away that last pretense. My silver hair hung limp against my skull, and my cheekbones jutted out more sharply than I remembered. The woman staring back at me looked fragile, discarded. But appearances, I'd learned, could be deceiving. I settled back into the uncomfortable chair beside my bed and pulled out the small notebook I'd requested from the gift shop. The pen felt heavy in my hand, heavier than it should have, considering what I was about to write. Outside my window, families hurried past in the parking lot, their arms full of flowers and balloons, rushing to comfort their loved ones. My phone had remained silent. The memory of waking up on my kitchen floor still felt surreal. One moment, I'd been preparing dinner, pot roast, the way Samuel used to like it, though he'd been gone 3 years now. And the next, I was staring at fluorescent lights while paramedics asked me questions I couldn't quite answer. The doctor said it was a combination of dehydration and medication interaction. Nothing serious, he'd assured me. Just my body's way of telling me to slow down. They'd needed an emergency contact. I'd given them Laura's number without hesitation. My daughter, who lived just 45 minutes away in her pristine suburban home, the same daughter who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who'd made me Mother's Day cards with crooked letters that spelled out "World's Best Mom." I'd heard the nurse make the call. Her professional tone had been gentle but urgent. "Ms. Perez, this is Mercy General Hospital. Your mother, Elizabeth Perez, was brought in this morning. She's stable, but we'd recommend that family members." The response had been brief, so brief that even I, lying in my hospital bed 20 feet away, could hear my daughter's voice through the phone. "This is our weekend away. Can't this wait until Monday?" The nurse had paused, clearly taken aback. "Ma'am, your mother is alone and she's fine, isn't she? Not dying." Laura's voice had that clipped efficiency she'd perfected over years of running her real estate business. "Well, no, but then Monday will be fine. We've had this trip planned for months." The line had gone dead. The nurse had approached my bed with the kind of carefully neutral expression medical professionals must practice in mirrors. "Your daughter sends her love," she'd said. The lie delivered so smoothly, it might have been believable to someone who hadn't just heard the conversation. I'd simply nodded and turned toward the window. That was 7 days ago. 7 days of meals on plastic trays. 7 days of watching game shows on a television mounted too high on the wall. 7 days of declining calls from well-meaning neighbors who'd heard about my episode through the neighborhood grapevine. I told everyone the same thing. My family was handling everything. No need to worry. The truth was more complicated. Lori had built her life like a house of cards, beautiful to look at from the outside, but entirely dependent on everyone else staying perfectly still. Her marriage to Christopher, her successful real estate career, her image as the devoted daughter and mother, it all required a very specific narrative. And in that narrative, having a mother collapse alone in her kitchen didn't fit the script. I opened the notebook to a fresh page and began to write. My dearest Lori, by the time you read this, you'll have found the flowers. Dora brought them to me on Tuesday. She said, every room needs something alive. I've been thinking about that word, alive. What does it mean to be alive when the people who are supposed to love you treat you like an inconvenience? I paused, my pen hovering over the paper. Through the thin hospital walls, I could hear a family in the next room. Laughter, crying, the gentle murmur of people who cared about each other. The sound made my chest tighten. You used to bring me flowers when you were little, dandelions from the yard, usually their stems crushed in your small fist. You'd present them to me like they were roses, and I'd put them in my best vase and tell you they were the most beautiful flowers I'd ever seen. Because they were. Not because of what they looked like, but because of the love behind them. The door to my room opened, and Glenn stepped in with his usual kind smile. He was younger than Lori, probably in his 30s, but he had the sort of gentle competence that made him seem older. How are we feeling today, Mrs. Perez? He asked, checking the chart at the foot of my bed. Ready to go home, I said, closing the notebook. Well, that's what I came to talk to you about. Your blood pressure is stable, and all your tests came back normal. We can discharge you this afternoon if you'd like. He glanced around the room, noting the absence of visitors that had marked my entire stay. Will someone be picking you up? I looked at my phone one more time. Still nothing. I'll arrange for a taxi, I said. He frowned slightly. Mrs. Perez, after an episode like this, we typically recommend that patients have someone stay with them for at least a day or two. Family, friends. Doctor, I said, my voice steady. I've been taking care of myself for 68 years. I think I can manage one more night. He nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. These young doctors, they still believed in families that functioned the way they were supposed to. After he left, I returned to my letter. My handwriting was still strong, still the careful script I'd learned in Catholic school all those years ago. The nuns would have been proud. I've had 7 days to thank Lori. 7 days to remember all the ways I made excuses for you over the years. When you forgot my birthday, I told myself you were busy with work. When you stopped bringing the grandchildren to visit, I convinced myself they were just growing up, becoming independent. When you began treating family gatherings like business obligations, arriving late, leaving early, checking your phone constantly, I told myself that's just how your generation shows love. But lying in this hospital bed, listening to other families comfort each other, I realized something important. I've been enabling you to treat me as disposable. I set the pen down and walked to the window. The parking lot was emptying as visiting hours wound down. Soon the hospital would settle into its night rhythm, the soft padding of nurses' feet in the hallway, the distant beeping of machines, the occasional cry from someone in pain. My reflection in the window looked different now. Still tired. Still older than I felt inside. But there was something else. A hardness around the eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. I thought about Christopher, Lori's husband of 15 years. Sweet, trusting Christopher, who worked 60-hour weeks at his accounting firm to pay for the house, the cars, the private school tuition, the annual European vacations that Lori documented so carefully on social media. Christopher, who believed he was married to a woman who'd put family above everything. If only he knew about the afternoon visits from Wyatt Goldberg, the developer who'd been buying up properties in our old neighborhood. If only he knew about the hotel receipts I'd accidentally seen fall from Lori's purse last Christmas. If only he knew that his wife's sudden interest in networking events and client dinners had been going on since their second year of marriage. I'd known, of course. Mothers always know. But I'd kept quiet, telling myself it wasn't my business, that marriages were complicated, that Lori would figure it out eventually. Now, staring at my reflection in the window, I wondered why I'd protected her for so long. Why I'd let her treat Christopher's love and trust like a commodity to be exploited while she satisfied her needs elsewhere. The answer was simple, because I'd been trained over decades of motherhood to put her needs above everyone else's, including my own. I picked up the pen again. Tomorrow, you'll come to my room expecting to find me grateful for your attention. You'll bring flowers, expensive ones, from the florist, not dandelions from the yard. And you'll apologize for the delay. You'll have a perfectly reasonable explanation that puts you in the best possible light. You always do. But when you open that door, you're going to find something different. You're going to find a mother who's done making excuses for you. You're going to find someone who's finally learned the difference between love and convenience. And Lori, you're going to discover that your mother is far from finished with living. I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it beside the wilted flowers. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Wyatt Goldberg Development, the familiar voice answered. Wyatt? I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. It's Elizabeth Perez. I think it's time you and I had a conversation about my daughter. Wyatt Goldberg arrived at the hospital within an hour, his silver BMW sliding into a visitor's parking space like a predator claiming territory. I watched from my window as he adjusted his tie and checked his reflection in the car's tinted windows. Even from 4 floors up, I could see the careful way he moved, a man accustomed to managing impressions, to controlling narratives. I changed from my hospital gown into the clothes I'd worn a week ago, a simple olive dress that had seen better days but still held its shape. If I was going to have this conversation, I would have it on my terms, not as a patient in a hospital bed, but as a woman who still commanded respect. He knocked softly before entering, his expensive cologne arriving before he did. Wyatt Goldberg was the kind of man Lori had always been drawn to. Tall, well-dressed, successful enough to be interesting, but not so successful that he wouldn't need what she could offer. At 45, he still had most of his hair and the kind of confidence that came from years of getting his way. Mrs. Perez, he said, his voice carrying that practiced warmth real estate developers used on city planning committees. I have to say, I'm surprised by your call. I'm sure you are. I gestured to the chair beside my bed. Please sit. We have quite a lot to discuss. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose I recognized from countless community meetings where he'd presented development proposals. Always in control, always managing the room. I'm not sure what Lori may have told you about our business relationship, but Wyatt, I let his name hang in the air for a moment. I'm 68 years old. I've buried a husband, raised 3 children, and survived more family crises than you've had hot meals. Please don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is about zoning permits and property assessments. Something shifted in his expression. The professional mask slipped slightly, revealing the calculation underneath. What exactly do you want? He asked. I opened the drawer of my bedside table and pulled out a manila folder, one I'd had delivered from my home office yesterday, along with several other documents. I want you to understand that I know exactly what you've been doing with my daughter, and more importantly, I want you to understand what I'm going to do about it. His jaw tightened. Mrs. Perez, whatever you think you know, the Marriott on Riverside Drive, room 237, every Thursday for the past 8 months. I kept my voice conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. Before that, it was the Hampton Inn on Oak Street. But you upgraded when your business started doing better. Lori always did have expensive tastes. Wyatt sat down heavily in the chair. The predator confidence was evaporating, replaced by the look of a man who'd just realized he was the prey. You hired a private investigator, he said. I almost smiled. I didn't need to. My daughter has always been careless when she thinks no one is watching. Hotel receipts in her purse when she came for Christmas dinner. Text messages left open on her phone when she asked me to hold it while she used the bathroom. Credit card statements she forgot to collect from my mailbox when she was handling my finances last year. The folder contained photographs, not the kind that would satisfy a divorce attorney, but enough to make Lori's afternoon activities undeniably clear. Wyatt entering the hotel, Lori arriving 10 minutes later, the two of them leaving separately, but with the satisfied look of people who'd gotten exactly what they came for. "What do you want from me?" His voice had lost its polish. "I want you to understand something about consequences," I said. "My daughter has spent 15 years lying to a good man. She's taken his love, his money, his trust, and she's used all of it to fund a lifestyle that includes you. Christopher works himself to exhaustion to pay for a house, cars, private schools, vacations, all while his wife spends her afternoons in hotel rooms with a man who's been systematically buying up our old neighborhood to tear it down for strip malls." Wyatt flinched. He'd clearly hoped I didn't know about his development plans for the area where I'd raised my children. "Christopher deserves to know the truth," I continued. "Not because I'm vindictive, but because he's a human being who's been made a fool of for far too long." "And what about Lori?" There was something almost pleading in his voice now. "This will destroy her marriage, her reputation. Her business depends on—" "Her business depends on lying." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't soften them. "Lori has built her entire life on managing perceptions instead of dealing with reality. Her marriage, her career, her relationship with me, it's all about maintaining an image that serves her needs." I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the parking lot where families still came and went, still rushed to comfort their loved ones. "Do you know she didn't come to see me for 7 days? Her mother collapses in her kitchen, gets rushed to the hospital, and she can't be bothered to cancel a weekend trip?" "She mentioned she was traveling with Christopher." I turned back to face him. "Or were you planning to be otherwise occupied that weekend?" His silence was answer enough. "Here's what's going to happen, Wyatt. You are going to end this affair today. You're going to stop buying properties in my old neighborhood. Yes, I know about the Baker House and the Henderson's place. And I know you're using Lori's real estate connections to pressure people into selling below market value. And you're going to disappear from my daughter's life completely. And if I don't?" I opened the folder wider, revealing additional documents underneath the photographs. Bank records, email printouts, a detailed timeline of property acquisitions that coincided suspiciously with Lori and Wyatt's relationship milestones. Then Christopher gets everything. The hotels, the timing, the pattern of purchases, the emails where you and Lori discuss using her marriage connections to facilitate your business deals. All of it. Wyatt leaned forward, studying the documents. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how I'd gathered so much information while lying in a hospital bed. "The internet is a wonderful thing," I said, as if reading his thoughts. "Amazing what you can accomplish with a laptop and too much time on your hands." Lori always underestimated technology. She thought deleting text messages was enough, never realizing that phone companies keep records. She thought using her maiden name at hotels provided anonymity, never considering that credit cards create paper trails. "You could destroy both of us with this," he said quietly. "I could? The question is whether I need to." He was quiet for a long time, staring at the folder's contents. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "What about you?" he asked. "Don't you care what this does to Lori?" I thought about the 7 days I'd spent in this room waiting for a daughter who never came. I thought about the years of excuses I'd made for her, the ways I'd protected her from the consequences of her choices. I thought about Christopher working late again tonight, believing he was married to a woman who valued family above everything else. "I care about what she's become," I said, "but I care more about what she's done to other people in the process." Wyatt closed the folder and stood up. "I'll end it. The affair, the property deals, all of it. Today. Today." He paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Perez, I'm sorry about the hospital situation. That was exactly who my daughter is," I said. The only difference is that now I'm done pretending otherwise. After he left, I sat back down and picked up my pen. There was more to add to Lori's letter. Wyatt Goldberg came to see me today. Interesting man. He understood consequences much faster than I expected. But then again, he's not blinded by decades of motherly forgiveness. You'll discover soon enough that your Thursday afternoon arrangements are over. You'll probably try to blame him, to make yourself the victim of his decision. You'll tell yourself that I somehow forced his hand, that this is all my fault for interfering. But here's what you won't be able to explain away. Christopher is going to find out everything. Not because I'm vindictive, but because he deserves the truth. He deserves to make his own choices based on reality, not on the carefully constructed fiction you've been feeding him. You taught me something important this week, Lori. You taught me that love without respect is just manipulation. That family without honesty is just convenient fiction. That being a mother doesn't mean accepting whatever crumbs of attention you decide to throw my way. I paused, listening to the sounds of the hospital around me. Tomorrow morning, I would leave this place and return to my empty house. But I wouldn't be returning as the same woman who'd collapsed on her kitchen floor a week ago. That woman had died here, in this sterile room surrounded by wilted flowers and unanswered phone calls. The woman writing this letter was someone else entirely. The taxi ride home cost $37. Money I could afford, unlike the woman I'd been pretending to be for my daughter's convenience. As we pulled into my driveway, I noticed Sadie from next door peeking through her curtains. She'd probably been watching for me since the ambulance took me away a week ago. "You sure you're okay going in alone, ma'am?" the driver asked, eyeing my house with concern. It looked smaller than I remembered, more vulnerable somehow. Sitting there with its drawn curtains and week-old newspapers scattered on the porch. "I'm fine," I said, and for the first time in days, I meant it. The house smelled stale and abandoned. Mail had piled up on the floor beneath the mail slot. Bills, advertisements, a sympathy card from the Methodist church. I gathered it all and carried it to the kitchen, where the evidence of my collapse still remained. The pot roast ingredients I'd never gotten to cook, now spoiled and rank in the refrigerator. The wooden spoon I'd dropped still lying beside the counter where I'd fallen. I cleaned methodically, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of restoring order. By evening, the house looked like itself again, but I felt like a stranger in it. 7 days in that hospital room had changed something fundamental about how I saw this space. The home where I'd raised 3 children, where I'd grieved my husband, where I'd been planning to age gracefully in quiet solitude. Now it felt like a stage set for a play I no longer wanted to perform. The testimonials praised her dedication to family values, her understanding of what home really meant, her ability to help families find their perfect sanctuary. Lori Perez helped us find not just a house, but a place where our children could grow up surrounded by love and stability, read one review. She truly understands what matters most in life. I closed the laptop and sat in the growing darkness of my kitchen, thinking about the different versions of my daughter that existed in the world. There was the Lori that Christopher knew, devoted wife and mother, successful businesswoman who balanced career and family with Bryce. There was the Lori that her clients knew, the agent who understood family values and the importance of home. There was the Lori that her children knew, busy but loving, always working hard to provide for their future. And then there was the Lori I knew now, the one who spent Thursday afternoons in hotel rooms while her husband worked late to pay for their life, who couldn't be bothered to visit her hospitalized mother because it conflicted with a weekend getaway. The question was, which Lori was real? Or were they all real, just carefully compartmentalized to serve different needs? My phone buzzed with a text message. "Lori, finally!" "Mom, just got your discharge notice from the hospital. Why didn't you call me? Coming by tomorrow morning to check on you. Love you." I stared at the message for a long time. Even now, she was managing the narrative, making my discharge sound like something I should have consulted her about, positioning herself as the caring daughter who'd rushed over as soon as she knew. No mention of the 7 days she'd ignored my existence, no acknowledgement that I'd been released because I'd had no other choice but to take care of myself. I typed back, "I'm fine. See you tomorrow." Then I deleted the message and wrote instead, "Come whenever it's convenient for you. I'll be here." The night stretched ahead of me. Too long and too quiet. I tried watching television but found myself thinking about Christopher instead, wondering if he was working late again, if he'd grabbed dinner from the vending machine at his office, if he'd texted Lori to say he'd be home late and received some lie about client meetings or property showings in response. At midnight, I gave up on sleep and returned to my laptop. This time, I opened my email and began typing. Christopher, I hope you don't mind me writing to you directly. I've been thinking a lot lately about family, about honesty, and about the people we choose to trust with our hearts. There are things you deserve to know about your marriage. Things that have been hidden from you for reasons that have nothing to do with protecting you and everything to do with protecting someone else's secrets. I've struggled with whether to tell you this, not because I doubt you deserve the truth, but because I know how much it will hurt. But I've realized that the pain of living a lie is often worse than the pain of facing reality. I stopped typing and stared at the cursor blinking on the screen. Once I sent this email, there would be no going back. Christopher's world would shatter. Lori's carefully constructed life would crumble, and I would be the one who lit the match. But wasn't I already past the point of no return? Hadn't that moment come when I'd listened to my daughter choose a vacation over her mother's crisis? Or maybe it had come earlier during all those years when I'd watched her treat Christopher's love like a convenience store, something to grab whatever she needed from without thinking about the cost. I saved the email as a draft and closed the laptop. Tomorrow, when Lori arrived, I would see if there was anything left of the daughter I'd raised, anything worth salvaging from the woman she had become. If there was, if she could find some genuine remorse, some real recognition of the pain she'd caused, then maybe we could find a different path forward. But if she came to my house with more lies, more excuses, more careful management of appearances, then Christopher would get his email and Lori would learn what consequences actually looked like. I slept fitfully that night, waking repeatedly to check the clock. At 6 in the morning, I gave up and made coffee, then sat at my kitchen table, watching the sun rise over the neighborhood I'd called home for 40 years. The Baker house across the street stood empty, a for sale sign tilted at an angle in the overgrown front yard. Wyatt Goldberg's doing, no doubt. Another family pressured into selling below market value so he could tear down their home and build something more profitable. At 9:30, Lori's white Mercedes pulled into my driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as she sat in the car for a moment, checking her appearance in the rearview mirror, gathering herself for the performance ahead. She emerged carrying a large bouquet of roses, red ones, expensive, the kind you bought when you needed to make a statement about your own thoughtfulness. She knocked on the front door, even though she had a key. Another calculated choice, respecting my space, showing consideration she hadn't bothered with during my actual crisis. "Mom," she called out, "it's me." I opened the door and looked at my daughter. Really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. At 43, Lori was still beautiful, with the kind of polished perfection that came from regular salon appointments and personal trainers. Her tailored blazer probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. Her smile was warm and practiced, the same one she used on clients and community groups. "Oh, Mom," she said, stepping forward to embrace me. "I'm so sorry I couldn't get here sooner. The conference ran late, and then Christopher had that emergency client meeting, and you know how these work trips are. Absolutely no flexibility in the schedule." I accepted her embrace, but didn't return it. Conference, the Regional Real Estate Summit in Charleston. I told you about it weeks ago. She handed me the roses, their thorns carefully removed, their stems perfectly trimmed. "These are for you. I know how much you love flowers." I held the bouquet and studied her face. Not a flicker of uncertainty, no crack in the facade. She genuinely seemed to believe her own story, or at least to believe that I would accept it without question. Charleston? I repeated. Yes, the Marriott downtown. Absolutely gorgeous property, though the conference facilities could use updating. She moved past me into the house, already taking control of the space. You should have seen the networking reception. 300 agents from across the Southeast. Christopher was so impressed when I told him about the keynote speaker. I closed the door and followed her into the living room where she was already straightening throw pillows and opening curtains, making the space more to her liking. How is Christopher? I asked. Oh, you know Christopher. Busy season at the firm, working himself to death as usual. He sends his love, of course. He wanted to come with me this morning, but he's got back-to-back appointments all day. She turned to face me, her expression shifting to carefully calibrated concern. But enough about us. How are you feeling? You look pale. Are you eating enough? And there it was, the seamless transition from elaborate lie to motherly concern, as if the past 7 days had never happened, as if I hadn't spent a week alone in a hospital room waiting for a daughter who was too busy with her conference to spare an hour for her mother. I looked at the roses in my hands, their red petals perfect and artificial looking under the morning light streaming through my windows. Something in my tone must have registered because Lori's professional smile faltered for just a moment. She recovered quickly, settling herself on my couch with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to managing difficult conversations. Of course, Mom. What's on your mind? She leaned forward, slightly, hands folded in her lap, a pose I recognized from her real estate photos. Engaged, trustworthy, ready to solve whatever problem I might present. I remained standing, still holding her roses. They felt heavy in my hands, weighted with expectation and performance. Tell me about your conference, I said. What about it? A small line appeared between her eyebrows. The Marriott in Charleston, the keynote speaker, the 300 agents. I kept my voice conversational, curious rather than confrontational. It sounds like it was quite an event. It was very productive. I made some excellent contacts for the firm. She was regaining her confidence, settling back into the familiar rhythm of managing information. Why do you ask? Just interested in your work. You know how much I've always supported your career. This was true, and we both knew it. I'd watched her children when she had weekend showings. I'd attended her awards dinners when Christopher was traveling. I'd celebrated every milestone, every success, every moment of recognition she'd earned in the competitive world of real estate. I know you have, Mom, and I appreciate it more than you know. Her voice softened, taking on the warmth she reserved for moments when she needed something from me. That's why I felt so terrible about not being able to visit sooner. But you understand how these industry events work. They're so important for maintaining relationships. Relationships, I repeated. Yes, I can see how important those are to you. I walked to the kitchen and found a vase for the roses. Taking my time with the arrangement, through the pass-through window, I could see Lori checking her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen, probably texting someone about how long this visit might take, when she could escape back to her real life. Lori, I called from the kitchen, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you broke Mary's window with a baseball? A pause. Vaguely. Why? You came running into the house crying, convinced you were going to jail. I filled the vase with water, watching the roses settle into their new arrangement. I told you that accidents happen, but what mattered was telling the truth and making it right. Mom, I'm not sure what this has to do with... So we walked over to Mary's house together, and you apologized. You used your allowance to help pay for the new window. Do you remember what I told you afterward? Another pause. Longer this time. Not really. I told you I was proud of you. Not because you broke the window. That was careless. But because when it mattered, you chose honesty over convenience. You chose to do the right thing even when it was hard. I carried the vase back to the living room and set it on the coffee table between us. The roses looked artificial in the morning light. Too perfect. Too carefully arranged. That's a nice memory, Mom, but I'm not sure why. I've been thinking about that little girl a lot lately, I said, sitting down across from her for the first time. wondering what happened to her, wondering when she decided that truth was less important than convenience. Lori's phone buzzed. She glanced at it automatically, then back at me. I'm sorry, what? Your phone. Important message? Just work stuff. She turned the phone face down on her lap. Mom, you're acting strange. Are you sure you're feeling okay? Maybe the doctors discharged you too early. There it was. The deflection I'd been expecting. Turn the conversation away from her behavior and toward my mental state. Make me the problem that needed managing. I'm feeling clearer than I have in years, I said. Clear enough to recognize when someone is lying to me. The words hung in the air between us. Lori's carefully constructed expression began to crack around the edges. Mom, I don't know what you think. The Marriott in Charleston doesn't have conference facilities, I said quietly. I called them yesterday. They're a boutique hotel with 47 rooms and a small restaurant. No conference center, no ballrooms, no facilities for 300 people. Lori's face went very still. There must be some confusion. Maybe it was a different Marriott. There is no regional real estate summit scheduled for this weekend in Charleston. I checked with the South Carolina Association of Realtors. Their next conference isn't until October. Mom, but you're right about one thing. The Marriott downtown Charleston is a beautiful property. I can see why you'd choose it for a romantic weekend getaway. The color drained from Lori's face. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. I don't know what you think you know, but I know about Wyatt Goldberg. The name hit her like a physical blow. She actually flinched. I know about the Thursday afternoon meetings at the Riverside Marriott. I know about the property deals you've been facilitating for him, using your marriage connections to pressure families into selling below market value. Lori stood up abruptly, her phone clattering to the floor. How dare you spy on me? How dare you? How dare I what? Care about my son-in-law? Care about the man who's worked himself to exhaustion for 15 years to give you everything you wanted while you've been... Stop! Lori's voice was sharp, desperate. Just stop. You don't understand the situation. Christopher and our marriage is complicated. These things happen in marriages. People grow apart. They find connections elsewhere. It doesn't mean what? That you're a liar? That you're a fraud? That you've been stealing 15 years of that man's life? I'm not stealing anything. Christopher is happy. He has a beautiful home, successful wife, healthy children. He has a lie. I stood up, facing her across the coffee table with its arrangement of perfect, expensive roses. He has a wife who views his love as a credit line to be maxed out while she gets her real needs met elsewhere. Lori was breathing hard now, her professional composure completely shattered. You don't know what you're talking about. Marriage isn't some fairy tale, Mom. People have needs. They make compromises. Christopher knows I work long hours. He knows my business requires... Does he know you've been sleeping with Wyatt Goldberg since your second year of marriage? The question hit like a slap. Lori actually stepped backward, her hand going to her throat. Does he know that your client dinners and networking events are code for hotel rooms? Does he know that the woman he trusts to manage your family's finances has been helping her lover manipulate property values in our old neighborhood? Stop it! Lori's voice was barely a whisper. Does he know that when his mother-in-law collapsed and was rushed to the hospital, his devoted wife couldn't be bothered to cancel her adultery weekend to show basic human decency? Stop it! The shout echoed through my small house, followed by a silence so complete I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway, ticking away the seconds. Lori stood frozen in my living room, her chest heaving, her carefully applied makeup smeared with tears. I hadn't seen her shed. You want to know what I know? I walked to the kitchen and returned with my laptop, opening it on the coffee table. I know everything, Lori. Hotel receipts, credit card statements, text messages discussing your arrangements with Wyatt, photos of you entering and leaving hotels on days when you told Christopher you were showing properties across town. I turned the screen toward her. She stared at it for a long moment, then sank back down onto the couch as if her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "I've suspected for years. I've had proof for months. I've had enough evidence to destroy your marriage and your career for 6 months." She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something that might have been the 8-year-old who'd broken Mary's window, frightened, ashamed, looking for a way out of the consequences of her actions. "Why didn't you say anything before?" "Because I kept hoping you'd remember who you used to be. I kept thinking that maybe you'd find your way back to the person who chose honesty over convenience, even when it was hard. And now," I closed the laptop and sat back down. "Now, I know that person is gone. She died sometime between learning how to lie without flinching and convincing herself that other people's pain doesn't matter as long as she gets what she wants." Lori was crying openly now, mascara leaving dark tracks down her cheeks. "Mom, please, I know this looks bad, but you don't understand. Christopher and I, we haven't been happy for years. We're like roommates, just going through the motions. Wyatt makes me feel—" "Stop." My voice cut through her explanation like a blade. "Do not sit in my living room and try to justify 15 years of betrayal by claiming you weren't happy. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending your affair is about love instead of selfishness." "But it is about love. Wyatt ended it yesterday." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I had a very interesting conversation with him at the hospital. He understood consequences much faster than you seem to." Lori's face went white. "What did you do?" "I showed him what accountability looks like, something you apparently never learned." She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she tried to unlock it. I could see her scrolling frantically through messages, looking for some communication from Wyatt that would contradict what I'd just told her. "He won't answer," I said calmly. "He's a businessman, Lori. When presented with evidence that could destroy his reputation and his development deals, he made the smart choice. He chose his career over a married woman who was never going to leave her husband anyway." The phone slipped from her hands and fell to the floor again. "You've ruined everything. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for." "I haven't ruined anything. I've simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own choices." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd raised her, where I'd taught her right from wrong, where I'd believed she would grow up to be a woman of integrity. Christopher deserves to know the truth, Lori. He deserves the chance to decide for himself whether your marriage is worth saving or whether he'd rather start over with someone who won't lie to him for 15 years. You can't tell him. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. Think about the children. Think about what this will do to them. I turned back to face her. I am thinking about them. I'm thinking about what kind of mother they have, what kind of example you're setting. I'm thinking about whether they deserve to grow up believing that love means accepting whatever crumbs someone tosses your way while they get their real needs met elsewhere. Lori slumped forward, her face in her hands. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to tell him yourself." She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "If I tell Christopher everything, if I confess and ask for forgiveness, then—" "That's between you and him." "But understand this, Lori. I'm done protecting you. I'm done making excuses for you. I'm done being the mother who enables her daughter to hurt good people without consequences. And if I don't tell him—" I walked back to the laptop and opened it again, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The email to Christopher was still there in my drafts folder, waiting. Lori left my house 20 minutes later, her designer blazer wrinkled and her makeup destroyed. She didn't take the roses with her. I watched from my kitchen window as she sat in her Mercedes for nearly 10 minutes, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Part of me, the part that had raised her, that had kissed her scraped knees and celebrated her achievements, wanted to go to her, to offer comfort the way mothers are supposed to do. But a larger part of me, the part that had spent 7 days learning the difference between love and enabling, stayed exactly where I was. When she finally drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete certainty about a difficult decision. I gave her until 6. That seemed fair. Enough time to drive home, to gather whatever courage she might still possess, to find the words that would begin to repair 15 years of betrayal. Enough time to prove that somewhere underneath the lies and selfishness, the 8-year-old who'd chosen honesty over convenience might still exist. At 6:15, I opened my laptop and sent the email to Christopher. His response came faster than I'd expected. Just 8 minutes later, my phone rang. "Mrs. Perez?" His voice was thick with emotion, barely recognizable. I need to know if this is real. Please tell me you have some reason to make this up." My heart broke for him. Even faced with documented evidence of his wife's infidelity, his first instinct was to hope it wasn't true. "I'm sorry, Christopher. I wish I were lying." A long silence. Then, "How long have you known?" "I've suspected for years. I've had proof for months. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since I'd typed that first email. Because I kept hoping she would choose to be better. I kept thinking that maybe if I waited, if I gave her enough chances, she would remember who she used to be. And now I know that some people would rather lose everything than admit they were wrong. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. "The kids are at my mother's tonight. Lori said she needed to have a serious conversation with me when I got home from work. I guess this is what she meant." So she was going to tell him. Maybe there was hope after all. "Christopher, whatever happens next, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You've been a good husband, a good father, a good man. Don't let her convince you otherwise." "Thank you." His voice cracked. "I need to go. She's in the driveway." The line went dead. I spent the evening in my garden, pulling weeds that had grown wild during my hospital stay. My hands remembered the rhythm of it, the satisfaction of clearing away what didn't belong, making space for what should grow there instead. By the time I went inside, my flower beds looked like themselves again. My phone buzzed with a text message at 9:30. "Mom, Christopher and I are separating. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed our family." I read it 3 times, then deleted it without responding. 20 minutes later, another message. "The children are devastated. I hope this was worth it to you." I deleted that one, too. At 10:15, "I'm staying at Carol's tonight. Christopher wants me out of the house by the weekend. 15 years of marriage, and you've destroyed it in a single day." This time, I didn't delete the message. Instead, I typed back, "You destroyed it in 15 years. I just stopped pretending otherwise." I didn't hear from her again that night. Christopher called the next morning while I was having coffee on my back porch. The morning was crisp, full of the kind of promise that October brings, the sense of things ending cleanly to make room for what comes next. "Mrs. Perez, I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, Christopher. How are you holding up?" A long pause. "I keep thinking I should feel angrier, but mostly I just feel relieved. Is that terrible?" It's honest. There's nothing terrible about honesty. "I've been thinking all night about signs I missed, things that didn't make sense at the time. There were so many of them. Her phone calls that she'd taken another room, the way she'd get defensive when I asked about her schedule, the credit card charges that never quite matched her explanations. You trusted your wife. That's not a character flaw, Christopher. Maybe not, but it feels like stupidity right now. I understood that feeling. I'd spent years making excuses for Lori's behavior, telling myself that her neglect was just busyness, that her selfishness was just focus. We'd both been guilty of loving someone so much that we'd ignored who they actually were. What happens now? I asked. I'm filing for divorce. My lawyer says the adultery evidence will help with custody and property division. Lori's already talking about mediation, trying to keep this quiet, protecting her reputation, even now. Of course she was. Image management had always been Lori's first priority. The kids are taking it hard, Christopher continued. They keep asking if there's a way to fix it, if mommy and daddy can work things out. I don't know how to explain to them that some things can't be fixed. You tell them the truth in age-appropriate ways. You tell them that sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love. And when that happens, there are consequences. Like Mary's window. The reference surprised me. You remember that story? Lori told me about it once, years ago. She said it was the day her mother taught her that honesty matters more than convenience. I thought it was sweet at the time. Now his voice trailed off. Now you know she learned the lesson but chose to forget it. Yeah, we were quiet for a moment. Then Christopher said, Mrs. Perez, I want you to know that whatever happens between Lori and me, you're still family to me. You're still the kid's grandmother. This doesn't change that. The kindness in his voice almost undid me. After everything Lori had put him through, after the way she'd tried to blame me for the consequences of her own choices, he was still thinking about my relationship with my grandchildren. Thank you, Christopher. That means more than you know. I have to ask you something, though. The email you sent. You could have just told Lori you knew. You could have confronted her privately, given her a chance to end it quietly. Why did you decide to tell me? It was the question I'd been expecting, the one I'd been asking myself since I'd hit send on that email. Because you deserved the truth, I said. Because 15 years of lies was already 15 years too many. Because I finally realized that protecting Lori from consequences wasn't love. It was enabling. And because you were tired of watching her hurt people? Yes, that too. After we hung up, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching Sadie tend her roses across the street. She'd been widowed 2 years ago, but her garden had never been more beautiful. Sometimes, loss cleared the way for growth. My phone rang again around noon. Unknown number. Is this Elizabeth Perez? Yes. This is Carol Baker, Lori's friend. I think you know who I am. I did. Carol had been Lori's business partner until they'd had some kind of falling out 3 years ago. I'd never gotten the full story, but I could guess now that it had involved Wyatt Goldberg and property deals that weren't entirely ethical. What can I do for you, Carol? I wanted to thank you. The word surprised me. Thank me? For doing what I should have done years ago? For finally holding Lori accountable? I'm not sure I understand. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then, 3 years ago, Lori tried to get me to participate in one of Wyatt Goldberg's schemes, undervaluing properties, pressuring elderly homeowners to sell below market rates so he could flip them for development. When I refused, she made my life hell, spread rumors about my business practices, tried to steal my clients, even suggested to people that I was having personal problems that affected my judgment. I felt a familiar heaviness in my chest. Another person Lori had hurt in service of her own interests. I lost my partnership, most of my client base, had to start over from scratch. Carol's voice was steady, but I could hear the old pain in it. I always wondered if someone would eventually see through her act. I'm just glad it was someone who had the courage to do something about it. I'm sorry she hurts you, Carol. Don't be sorry. Be proud. You did what needed to be done. After she hung up, I realized that Lori's world wasn't just falling apart, it was revealing itself for what it had always been. A house of cards built on other people's pain, other people's trust, other people's willingness to overlook her behavior for the sake of peace. The afternoon brought more phone calls. Christopher's lawyer asking if I would be willing to provide testimony about Lori's adultery and business practices. Mary from across the street calling to tell me she'd heard about the divorce and wanted to me to know she was thinking of me. The pastor from the Methodist church offering pastoral care during what he assumed must be a difficult time for me. I thanked them all, but the truth was, I didn't feel like I needed care. I felt like I needed to breathe deeply, to walk in my garden, to sit in my clean house, and appreciate the silence. At sunset, I stood in my kitchen making dinner just for me, whatever I wanted, however I wanted to prepare it. Through the window, I could see the neighborhood settling into evening, lights coming on in houses where families gathered around dinner tables, where people told each other about their days, where love was offered without conditions or calculations. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Lori. "I'll never forgive you for this." I read it once, then typed back, "I don't need your forgiveness, Lori. I need your absence." Then I blocked her number and finished making my dinner. The woman who had collapsed in this kitchen floor 8 days ago was desperate for her daughter's love, willing to accept any crumbs of attention, any scraps of affection. She had died in that hospital room, surrounded by wilted flowers and unanswered phone calls. The woman who stood here now knew the difference between love and manipulation, between family and convenience, between protecting someone and enabling them to hurt others. I was 68 years old. I had buried a husband, raised 3 children, and survived more heartbreak than I'd thought possible. But I was never more alive. Outside my window, the neighborhood settled into peaceful evening rhythms. Inside my house, I sat down to a dinner made exactly the way I liked it. In a kitchen that belonged entirely to me, in a life finally free from the exhausting work of making excuses for someone else's cruelty. Some lessons take a lifetime to learn. Some are worth the wait. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.